Hey guys, welcome to the first proper episode of Political Tales. As I've said in the intro, we'll start off with a series about the political history of East Asian countries. For today, we'll talk about Vietnam. Let's get straight into it. Vietnam's modern history has been a rather infamous and turbulent one, to say the least. Most people know it for the Vietnam War in the 1960s, which was part of the larger geopolitical conflict that is the Cold War. However, I would like to take you back a few decades before that, to a lesser known event that I would say was a pretty significant turning point in Vietnamese history. It would lead Vietnam into the tumultuous times that followed. This is the August Revolution of 1945, a revolution led by the well known former leader of Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh, and his Independence Front, Viet Minh, which declared Vietnam independent from French colonial rule. The resulting disputes, peace talks, and escalating tensions ultimately broke out into war in the Indochina region, which wouldn't end until 30 years later. But before going into details, we need some background to it all. Vietnam has been under French rule as part of French Indochina since 1877. This is the name given to the region that in present day consists of Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. Decades of exploitation of resources and oppression have kept the population under poverty, which became the breeding ground for revolt and nationalist sentiments. In the early 1920s, a small group of Vietnamese were able to gather enough money to study abroad in countries like England, France, and the USA, where they came across a more liberal world of imperial nations. This is where Ho Chi Minh grew his socialistic and anti-imperialist ideals of an independent Vietnam. He was inspired by Lenin's Bolshevik Revolution in October 1917 and founded the Communist Party of Vietnam in 1930, later named the Indochinese Communist Party. In 1941, he also founded the League for Independence of Vietnam, or what is more commonly known as the Viet Minh, a united front to struggle for Vietnamese independence and sovereignty. World War II broke out and the Japanese invaded French Indochina in September 1940. The government of French Indochina was forced to allow Japanese troops to settle in Vietnam. Essentially, Vietnam became a colony under the Japanese Empire, who ruled through the French administration with Emperor Bao Dai as the puppet head of state. With the Viet Minh being formed in 1941, it emerged as an underground anti-French and anti-Japanese resistance group. It ran campaigns in the countryside to educate farmers and rural villagers of the importance of independence and brew nationalist sentiments. Such ideas of nationalism and independence, however, aren't new to the Vietnamese people after various failed attempts of revolt against French rule. The war saw the growing popularity of the Communist Party as well as that of various political religious organizations in the South, which were also rallying people to call for independence. As the war progressed, Vietnam grew closer and closer ever to a revolution. Fast forward to 1945, the Allied forces are looking to win the war. On March 9th of that year, in fear of the French turning against them, Japanese forces in Vietnam launched a coup d'etat against the existing French administration and colonial system, essentially ending nearly 7 decades of French colonial rule. Japanese forces asked Emperor Bao Dai to form a new puppet government, which they would use to rule Vietnam for the next 5 months. The ending of French rule proved highly crucial to Ho Chi Minh's Viet Minh, as it allowed them greater freedom of movement. Viet Minh aggressively campaigned in the north of the country to prepare the populace for an upcoming insurrection. Viet Minh bases were set up in the jungles and mountains. However, Viet Minh wasn't as successful in garnering the same amount of support in the south, which was dominated by fragmented nationalist groups, including the religious organizations mentioned earlier. August came, and the US dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrendered, and this marked the end of the war in the Pacific theater. This provided Ho Chi Minh with the perfect power vacuum for him to seize the opportunity and declare Vietnamese independence. He called for a national uprising and for Viet Minh forces in the countryside to march on cities and towns in the north. By August 19th, Viet Minh had seized the capital of Hanoi. The ease of the takeover was aided by the fact that Japanese forces allowed locals to grab onto power rather than wait for the Allies to arrive. Government buildings, facilities, and infrastructure came under Viet Minh control. The Vietnamese provisional government assumed control of the north of the country when Emperor Bao Dai abdicated on August 25th, and the Communist Party prepped the Declaration of Independence. On September 2nd, Ho Chi Minh proclaimed Vietnam's independence, beginning the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. The declaration, given in Hanoi to a crowd of 400,000, was heavily influenced by the ideals contained in the United States Declaration of Independence in 1776 and French Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen in 1791. A part of the declaration reads as follows: all men are created equal. They are endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This immortal statement was made in the Declaration of Independence of the United States of America in 1776. In a broader sense, this means all the peoples on the earth are equal from birth. All the peoples have a right to live, to be happy, and free. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen of the French Revolution, made in 1791, also states, all men are born free and with equal rights, and must always remain free and have equal rights. But of course, gaining such independence was never going to be a swift and easy job. When Allied Chinese troops arrived in the north of the country on September 9th to oversee Japanese surrender, Viet Minh was forced to suppress its left-wing values and restrict its own movement. The Indo-Chinese Communist Party was forced to dissolve itself. In the south, British troops arrived intending to restore French colonial rule in the area without negotiations with domestic powers. Ho Chi Minh, however, was determined to safeguard Vietnamese independence at any cost. By February 1946, Chinese forces negotiated with the French to allow French troops to return to the north, all the while allowing the Viet Minh to hold on to some power. The south, however, was increasingly being controlled by the British and the French. On March 6th, an accord was signed between Ho Chi Minh and French forces to allow the recognition of a self-governing northern Vietnam within the Indo-Chinese Confederation, as long as France was allowed to station its own troops there and continue to rule the south. Yet, as Ho Chi Minh had expected, France did not hold up to the agreement and brought in military reinforcements, increasing tensions with the Viet Minh. Tensions, disputes, and clashes continued throughout 1946 until the breaking point on December 19th. This was when the First Indochina War had started between Viet Minh, determined to drive out the French and liberate Vietnam once and for all, and France, who intended to use force to reoccupy Vietnam under its colonial rule. This war would lead to the division of Vietnam after Viet Minh forces were victorious, and a second war in their attempt to reunite North and South Vietnam. The USA became directly involved in this Second Indochina War, the infamous Vietnam War. There it is, guys, my first proper podcast. It was a bit shorter than what I had in mind when I wrote the script, but you guys tell me whether it's too short or is it just the right amount of, content and time. If it's too short, then maybe in the next one I could try and include a bit more detail and go deeper. But I hope you got something from this. Mainly the fact that the Vietnam War wasn't the only war that was fought in the region at the time, and there was a war prior to that between Viet Minh and France to kind of kick France out. They did that and they tried to reunite Vietnam, North and South. And then in fact there was a third Indochina War after the unification where Vietnam fought Cambodia and also China, and that would last until the late 1980s, early 1990s, and you guys can go read more on that. And please give me comments and If you're watching this on YouTube, then please like and subscribe. But yeah, please give me feedback on what I can do to improve this, and maybe what kind of topics or countries that you want me to do in the future. Please let me know. So I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you very much.